I am greatly pleased to be joined by my friend, the person who tells me what's happening in this very complicated and confusing town of Washington, D.C., the host of Off Kilter, Rebecca Vallas. Rebecca, thanks for joining us.
Alex, always a pleasure.
So you've got a lot of explaining to do because it is a confusing time here in Washington, D.C. And as I always point out, it's confusing on purpose, right? We could make a government process be simple. That would make a lot of sense. It would also be far less lucrative for the criminals on Wall Street. So everybody who basically make their money by looting the public coffers and the people, they want a really complicated setup. They want it to be very confusing about what's going on. For example, when the president releases his budget next week, they want the press to be like, ignore that. That's nothing. There's nothing in that. They're gonna call it dead on arrival or something like that. But it's the president's budget. It's a blueprint. It's what he wants to do. So why does that happen, or what is actually under what's going to be coming out with the president's budget? What continues to happen on the Hill and in HHS with Alex Azar there now? These are just continued assaults on the American people. Can you explain it a little bit?
Well, you put me in a tough position if you really want me to be the chief explainer on what's going on in the dumpster fire that is Washington, D.C. right now. But, Alex, I will do my best. So you mentioned the president's budget, which is scheduled to come out next week, next Monday, actually, February 12th. And this is a particularly important moment because as much as you said, a lot of folks in the media are going to say, this doesn't matter. It's DOA, or even some people are starting to say DBA, dead before arrival. The president's budget proposal is a document that, as you said, is a blueprint that lays out his priorities for the country. And it's not just Trump's priorities. This is really going to be the Republican Party's blueprint for what they want to do when it comes to policy in this country. And that's particularly important to understand because the Republicans have decided this year that they're basically just going to join forces with Trump, and that budget that gets released next week is the only budget that Republicans are going to put out this year. Congress isn't doing a separate one. So make no mistake, the budget blueprint that we see Trump release next week is the Republican Party's plan for the country. And why does this matter? Well, it's just been a few weeks since, really about a month now, since the tax plan became law, giving huge tax cuts to super rich people in this country, super rich corporations. And Republicans have continued to try to claim, Speaker Paul Ryan in the House of Representatives, chief among them, have continued to claim that somehow this tax plan is also a win for everyday Americans. Paul Ryan found himself in a bit of a hot mess over the weekend when he started tweeting out how he was talking to people and hearing stories of middle-class Americans who were so grateful for the tax plan because now they were going to see $1.50 extra in their paycheck each week, as though that was some heroic thing when you're seeing huge businesses like Exxon and others get windfalls of $2 billion each, right, in some cases. So this budget is going to be hugely important because it is the roadmap that's going to tell us all of the things Republicans want to cut to pay for that tax plan that they rammed through over the objections of the American people and without a single Democratic vote in Congress. And so the kinds of things that we know they are going to try to slash to pay for that tax plan to give huge tax cuts to millionaires and corporations are all the things that the American people who are not bajillionaires or wealthy corporations rely on every single day to make ends meet, whether that's Social Security, whether that's Medicaid, whether that's nutrition and housing and home heating assistance, basic environmental protections. All of these kinds of things are going to be under attack, and that budget blueprint is going to be the document that shows us exactly what Trump and Speaker Ryan want to do to pay for that tax plan.
Right. So that I think this is slightly too simple because it's slightly too simple, but not really. There's only one game plan. They only have one maneuver. They have to steal our money and give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street or their big corporate donors. But they have to take the money from somewhere. And that is what we're seeing. They can do it two different ways, though, because of the way the government is. With the Trump care fight, they were trying to take our money and then give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. But the tax scam, they gave the money to their criminal friends on Wall Street, and now they're going to pick our pockets. And this budget and what we're seeing in the House and in the Senate, but the House is more kind of open about what they're doing, is where they're going to reach into our pockets to steal our money. And that's all there is to it. There's only one maneuver they have. Take our money and give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street so that Wall Street and their corporate donors give them money for their re-elections. So we know,
that's exactly
we know what
right,
they're
Alex.
coming after. Go through some of the, like, what is the real world consequences of when they pick our pockets, when they cut nutrition, when they cut home heating assistance, when they cut $500 million from the Social Security budget, or they decimate Medicaid through all sorts of, propaganda-sounding things, like, work requirements or things like that. These are all just cuts. It's just stealing money. Go through some of the real-world consequences of these.
Yeah, Alex, I think you connected the dots there perfectly, right? Because they always told us this was going to be a two-step process. We knew all throughout 2017, as you said, that they were trying to take health care away from tens of millions of Americans, including people who literally rely on the Affordable Care Act and on Medicaid for life-saving treatment, all to pay for tax cuts for the rich. They were unable to do that because the American people stood up and said, no, we actually really like having health care. We really love Medicaid. We don't want to see you cut those things and take our health insurance away so that you can give tax cuts to people so that they can buy a boat to put inside their other boat. And so they weren't able to do that through legislation. So then they said, okay, I guess we'll just do the tax cuts part first while we're still in power, because it's going to be anyone's guess what happens next year. And that's this year now that we're living in 2018 with the midterms coming up. And so they said, we'll just do the tax cuts first. And so they did that. And now they're turning around, as we always knew they would, and saying, oh my God, look at these huge deficits. We can't afford these huge deficits. Where did these deficits come from? So it's like this amazingly convenient amnesia from Republicans who just blew huge holes in the deficit by giving their donor class massive tax cuts for Christmas. So we always knew this was all part of the same plan. And now we're back in the phase where they're trying to find ways to pay for the holes they blew in the deficit and that they're now scaremongering about. And they're doing that by targeting programs like Medicaid. So, Alex, you're asking about what kind of consequences will come to bear if they are successful. Well, actually, I think one of the things that's really terrifying is that President Trump has shown he is done waiting for Congress. Apparently, he took away the wrong lessons from last year's health care fight. He saw how hard it was to cut Medicaid and how popular Medicaid was with the American people. In fact, we've got new polling that the Center for American Progress just commissioned from a firm called GBA Strategies, finding that 80% of Americans are opposed to seeing Medicaid cut. And in fact, that cuts across party lines. It even includes Republicans and Trump's own voters who don't want to see Medicaid cut. But Trump learned the wrong lessons. He learned, you know what, maybe that means Congress isn't going to be able to get this done because this program is so popular. And so he's decided to turn around and try and take matters into his own hands and to end Medicaid as we know it by fiat. We saw him last month announce that for the first time in the history of the Medicaid program, he is now allowing states to take away Medicaid from people who can't find a job or get enough hours at work. A huge, huge, devastating blow to a program that is all about providing health insurance to people who are eligible for Medicaid. That's now being challenged in litigation. If I had to look into my crystal ball, would guess that litigation is going to be successful and that Trump has overreached. But in the meantime, he's now taken a second step and doubled down on those efforts to further dismantle Medicaid by announcing that he wants to let states implement lifetime limits on Medicaid coverage. This would essentially mean that people could end up facing a ticking clock and losing health insurance that allows them to access life-saving cancer treatment or basic services that people need if they're people with disabilities in order to live independently and in a community and instead of in a nursing home and even to work. So really heartless stuff that we're watching President Trump move forward and try to do over the vociferous objections of the American people. And I have to say, it's not going to stop here either. And that's why next week's budget release is so important, because it's going to be a preview of what we're going to see, not just President Trump, but Speaker Ryan in the House trying to do through legislation to take away health insurance from people who desperately need it, while also trying to take food out of the mouths of struggling families and poor children, housing away from people who need housing assistance, home heating assistance away from people just weeks after a polar vortex. These are the things that Paul Ryan has been dreaming of cutting since he was drinking out of kegs, he tells us, and he's got a president in the White House who's backing him all the way.
So I overset up by saying I simplify things too much, because I actually don't think I do. I think it is actually their only thing. When they give money away, they have to find that money from somewhere. And where they find it is the American people's pockets. And they will go after our money in any way that they can, because they've already given it to their criminal friends on Wall Street, to big oil, to big pharma. Then they put big pharma in charge of HHS to find creative ways to pick our pockets, to pretend like the best, like any way of trying to get somebody to work would be to take the chemotherapy away from somebody who is being treated for cancer, and somehow that is going to push that person to find a job. You don't actually create, push people to work by taking away their health care. You have to create jobs. You have to create bridges, build roads, infrastructure. You have to have a national jobs program. That's how you get people back to work. So it's all lies that they're pitching. All of their obfuscation that somehow lifetime caps are going to make people wiser consumers of health care. Well, I'm sorry, they don't get to choose. A person doesn't get to choose if they have to fight cancer or not. A person doesn't get to choose that. And they also don't get to choose how much the drugs cost or how much the hospital is going to charge. And so imposing a lifetime cap does nothing more, again, than just reach into our pocket and steal our money. That's what they're doing over and over and over again. But this is an election year, so they're going to go way out of their way to pretend that's not what they're doing. They're going to try to paint themselves as some sort of new brand of Republicans. So knowing that this is what they do, these greedy liars on Wall Street, they've got their lucre in their pocket, and they're saying to their minions in D.C., steal it from the people so I can go out on my yacht, inside my yacht. How can people fight back, Rebecca? Where can they go to raise their voices and fight against this wholesale looting of the American public?
Yeah, it's such an important question, Alex. And I want to say, before I tell people how they can fight back, I think the point you made about some of the unbelievably Orwellian language that Speaker Paul Ryan and President Trump and others are using to try to dress up unpopular cuts as something that sounds good or sounds like they care about helping the forgotten man and woman. I mean, it's just unbelievable the lengths they're going to try to hide what they're doing, which shows that they know how unpopular cutting Medicaid and all these other programs is. So, I mean, actually, just over the weekend, we saw Trump's director of Medicaid and Medicare, Seema Verna. She wrote an op-ed that was in the Washington Post that was one of the single most offensive pieces of writing I think I can remember seeing, because she was saying, what we're doing by taking away health insurance from people who need it, is it's really about helping people from poverty to prosperity. That's what this is about. Puppies and rainbows language, all about trying to help people work. And this on the heels of Speaker Paul Ryan announcing at the Republican retreats at Greenbrier just about a week ago that the new buzzword he wants Republicans to be using when they talk about cutting popular programs like Medicaid is, quote unquote, workforce development. And of course, this being the same party that wants to slash workforce development programs in this country by nearly half. We saw that from their budgets last year. We expect we'll probably see something similar this year. So incredibly cynical attempts to rebrand and sort of put new shades of lipstick on the same ugly, old, unpopular pig. So what can people do to fight back? Because as I said before, this is not what the American people want. It is time and time again when they are asked, it is the opposite of what people want. 80% of Americans oppose cuts to Medicaid. 78% of Americans oppose cuts to Social Security, disability benefits. The same goes for nutrition and housing and energy assistance and more, everything that's on Speaker Ryan and President Trump's hit list. So the Center for American Progress has joined forces with your organization, Social Security Works, and about 25 other leading progressive groups, disability groups, seniors groups, kids groups, organized labor groups like Indivisible, to all join forces and say in unison, hands off. President Trump, Speaker Ryan, Leader McConnell in the Senate, hands off my Medicaid, my nutrition, my housing, my education, my birth control, all of the other things that Americans don't want to see cut despite President Trump and Speaker Ryan moving forward with this agenda. Folks can learn more about the Hands Off campaign at handsoff.org. You can also share your story there of what cuts would mean to you, to your family, to your loved ones, to your community, and then use the hashtag #HandsOff on Twitter to tell President Trump and Speaker Ryan and Leader McConnell what you want to see from them in their budget and in their priorities this year.
Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us on the Zero Hour and with such an easy message of hands off, because that's what they have to do. Rebecca Vallas, host of Off Kilter and a great friend of the program. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alex.